Hello, this is Susan Hepburn, your professor for 310, and I'm going to talk to you today about the biosocial development within the first 2 years. Today's lecture is broken up into 4 very short lectures, and in this first part, we will talk about growth, specifically body changes, what happens in sleep in the infancy and toddler years, and a few key points about nutrition. First of all, body changes. Well, from the time that an infant is born until their first birthday, their birth weight is most likely to double by the 4th month and triple by 1 year. Now, there's substantial variation in this from child to child, but that's a pretty remarkable trajectory of growth. In general, the typical newborn in the United States grows about 10 inches by the age of 1 and usually weighs about 7 pounds at birth and is about 20 inches long. So they are kind of growing by half of their original weight over time. From year 1 to year 2, this physical growth is going to slow down a little bit. Interestingly, though, by the time a child is 2 years old, he or she is going to be 1/2 of their adult height and 1/5 of their adult weight. So as you can see, there are tremendous amounts of growth in the first few years of life. We have, as a field in pediatrics and child development, developed a way of understanding the normative trends, or in other words, how much weight or height should we expect a healthy child to gain over time. And this has led to the development of what we call norms or normative expectations. These are the standards of typical performance. These are the average measurements. Now, no individual is really expected to be exactly average. There's going to be variation around these norms, and if a child is sort of close to the norm but not exact, if they're within a certain range of normative, then they are thought to be average. And the way that we understand these standards is to use the term percentiles. So when we refer to a child's percentile of height, for example, that number indicates where the child is relative to other children the same age. So a child whose health percentile is 39, that means that they are as tall or taller than 39% of other children their age. So the percentile helps you understand where in the sample of children their age they fall. If you look at a growth chart, which is a tool that pediatricians use often, you'll notice that over time we as a field have collected enough data that we can develop these normative trends where we can kind of estimate where should females be, where should males be as far as height and weight at certain times of their lives. So in this chart, what you see here is are lines of growth, where if you look at the bottom, we're going from birth to the age of 24 months. And if you look at the right hand vertical axis, we're looking at weight in pounds. If you are more familiar with the metric system, you would use the axis on the left, the weight in kilograms, but they are really equal to each other. Notice that the girls and boys, either the full colored lines or the broken up lines, both of them are growing in weight over time. So they are expected from the age of birth to be making a certain amount of progress. The lines that are on the chart represent either the 90th percentile, meaning 90% of boys and girls are at that weight or above. Or below, sorry, the 50th percentile, where it shows that 50% of children are at that weight or below, or the 10th percentile. Now, if you think about average is about the 50th percentile with a little bit of room on either side. A child whose weight is at the 10th percentile would be thought of as underweight, and nutritional interventions may be needed. A child whose weight is at the 90th percentile may be thought of as overweight. And it's a bit of a controversial topic to determine if infants or toddlers ever need to lose weight. Usually, pediatricians will recommend that the more weight gain, the better, because of the amount of growth that happens during this time. But should a child continue to score at really high percentiles over their development, there could be some recommendations for looking at diet and reducing calorie intake. So norms and percentiles are really helpful to us to try to make sure that we are tracking a child's weight and height and making sure that their physical health is on track. So here's an example of the kind of growth we would expect. All three of these photos show the same child whose name is Connor. The first one, that's a 3-month-old baby right there. Notice that his head size is a lot bigger than the rest of his body. So proportionality changes over time as well. As an infant grows into a toddler, grows into a child, head size becomes more like the rest of the body. In the second picture, that's Connor at 1 year. So notice he's able to stand, he's taking steps, and you'll also see that his arms and legs and head are at a bit of a better proportion, more even proportion with his body. And in the last photo, the superhero photo in the cape, that's him at age 2. So to me, one of the most remarkable things is look at how much growth you have between 3 months and 12 months, and then notice how, while growth is happening, the trajectory is not as intense from 1 year to 2 years. Now let's talk about sleep. Newborns on average sleep about 15 to 17 hours a day. Many times the first couple of months after birth are referred to as the 4th trimester because in a way the infant continues to take most of their time resting, gathering nutrients, kind of like they did when they were in the womb. The newborn time period, while it can look on the surface like, wow, the parents must get a lot of rest if the baby's sleeping from 15 to 17 hours a day, unfortunately, this is the average, and it's not always that much sleep for every baby. And in addition, the sleep isn't always right in a row. You may have babies who sleep for 40 minutes, are up for 10 and crying. So whereas adults need a good 7 to 10 hours of deep sleep over time, infant sleep patterns don't always correspond with what the adults need. They tend to sleep more in bursts. Over the early weeks, REM sleep and traditional sleep actually declines and slow wave sleep increases, which is important for brain development. Now, there are a lot of individual differences in infant sleep. Could have to do with their genetic background as well as their environment. And in fact, one of the most important aspects of healthy infant sleep is how the caregiver responds to and encourages infant self-regulation. So one of the important recommendations that pediatricians and nurses will talk to new parents about is the idea that to try to get your infant on a sleep schedule, and that when the infant is napping, the adult should also be resting. And if you can sync up the infant and the adult sleep, then everyone is more likely to get sufficient enough sleep to be able to cope well. But one of the most vivid adjustments that happens when you have a baby is the adjustment in your sleep pattern. It is not simple, and many infants really struggle with getting to regulated sleep. Culturally, there are lots of different approaches to helping infants sleep well. Co-sleeping, or bed sharing, where infants and parents sleep together, has some advantages and some disadvantages, and it is embraced by some cultures over others, as you can see on this graph. Some of the advantages of sharing a bed with an infant is that there's a quick response time for the parent if the infant is distressed or hungry, and we do know that in the early months, how quickly a caregiver responds to an infant is thought of as a measure of responsivity. And being very responsive to your newborn baby's cues really helps build a strong and secure attachment between parent and child. So it could be an advantage to have the baby right next to you so that you can comfort her as soon as she's distressed. One of the disadvantages, and a very, very important one to consider, is there is actually a higher risk of SIDS, which is sudden infant death syndrome, in co-sleeping. There have is some mixed research on this topic, but in general, in co-sleeping, because of positions and breathing, it can increase that risk. There are also some concerns that if a baby learns over the long haul, so maybe across the whole first or second years of life, to fall asleep only with another person, that will lead to difficulty later learning how to self-regulate their own wakefulness and sleepiness. In fact, many people have written about the importance of maintaining a lot of responsivity when an infant who's falling asleep needs your help when they're really, really young. And then over time, as the child gets older, closer to like 14, 16, 18 months, it can be important to actually have the caregiver not respond right away to the very first cry, but to instead give the developing infant a chance to learn how to self-regulate, how to self-soothe, how to bring herself back to a sleep state. And co-sleeping can extend the dependence on the parent and make it harder for the child to learn to self-regulate. Now let's turn our attention to nutrition. It's really important in these early years, as it actually is across childhood, for infant development, for young people to get adequate nutrition. And worldwide, this is a huge problem. Every infant disease that we know about has a nutritional aspect that can usually be somewhat protective. Although controversial and although not possible for every mother and child, if possible, breastfeeding can reduce the risks of malnutrition and other diseases and can really help stimulate the immune system of the baby. Many people are very passionate about this topic and will work very, very hard to support mothers to help their infants latch on and be able to be breastfed. And many times those supports are very, very helpful. Some infants breastfeed regularly, readily. Others really struggle with it. And if a baby is not able to control their mouth muscles enough to latch on and get the nutrition that they need, it can become essential to make sure that you are supplementing these attempts at breastfeeding with other sources of nutrition. So it's something that every family needs to decide for themselves. Breastfed babies are less likely to develop allergies and other issues, but if a breastfed baby is not getting enough nutrients because of poor sucking reflexes, we absolutely need to supplement and sometimes stop breastfeeding and go to formula completely. As the infant gets older, the composition of the breast milk, amazingly, is going to naturally adjust to the baby's needs, and this is a pretty remarkable part of nature. When we think about the impact of malnutrition on infant development, one of the things that we see worldwide is if you don't get enough protein, that malnutrition can result in significant illnesses, weight loss, and even death. And it really can make a young child very vulnerable to any contagions that are in their environment. Sometimes malnutrition results in a condition we call stunting, which is where children fail to grow to a normal height or weight due to problems with their nutrition. And stunting sometimes is not reversible if it happens for long enough. Third thing that we are concerned about in malnutrition is wasting. And this is the term that we use for children who are severely underweight, and basically their malnutrition starts to really impact the functioning of their organs so that they become more and more vulnerable to illness. Chronic malnutrition is, in fact, one of our most important global health challenges, and we know that not only does it put children at risk physically, but it also impacts the development of their brains and their ability to learn. And while many diseases come from the infant system not being healthy enough, and then the disease can take hold, other diseases are directly linked to the malnutrition. And so it is a global health problem that really needs a lot of attention in the coming years. So in conclusion, physical growth and health is a really important mission of the first 2 years of life. And while every baby goes through an individual trajectory, we have norms that help guide our expectations. We want to pay attention to how well an infant is growing. We want to pay attention to how well they are sleeping and how well they are eating. And if parents need support or help, we want to make sure that we provide those resources so that this healthy growth pattern can continue. Thank you for your attention.